Your services are no longer required. Please clear out your desk by noon." The words struck me like a physical blow as I stood in front of Mr. Gregory Reed, the newly appointed CEO of Meridian Manufacturing. I had just finished presenting our quarterly financial report, which showed a 15% increase in profitability under my financial stewardship. "I don't understand," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. "The company is performing exceptionally well. What exactly is the issue with my work?" "This isn't about your performance, Michael," Reed replied dismissively. "We're implementing a new organizational structure, and your position has been deemed redundant. Your severance details are in this envelope." He slid a manila envelope across his immaculate glass desk without making eye contact. The morning sun filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office seemed to mock the darkness that had suddenly enveloped my professional life. "My name is Michael Donovan. For the past 12 years, I had served as Chief Financial Officer at Meridian Manufacturing, a family-owned business that produced specialized industrial equipment. The company had been founded by Harold Meridian 40 years ago and had grown steadily under the leadership of the Meridian family, until 3 months ago, that is when Harold's son-in-law, Gregory Reed, had taken over as CEO. The transition had been unexpected. Harold's daughter, Vanessa Meridian, had been groomed for leadership since joining the company after completing her MBA. She had worked in every department, learning the business from the ground up, and had been serving effectively as COO for the past 5 years. Everyone, including Harold, had expected her to take over when he retired. But then Gregory Reed entered the picture. He had married Vanessa's younger sister, Elaine, 2 years ago. With a background in private equity and a Harvard Business School pedigree, Reed had quickly ingratiated himself with Harold, offering advice on modernizing the company's approach to finance and operations. "The severance package includes 3 months' salary and benefits," Reed continued, checking his watch impatiently. "HR will assist with the transition. We've already brought in a financial consultant from my previous firm to handle your responsibilities in the interim." I stared at him, struggling to process what was happening. "Today is the 15th, I said. "We have vendor payments scheduled, the quarterly tax filing due, and a meeting with our banking partners about the expansion financing." "The consultant is familiar with all those matters," Reed replied dismissively. "We've been transitioning information for the past 2 weeks. Behind my back. For 2 weeks." The realization that this had been planned well in advance, that my termination had been orchestrated, while I continued to work diligently for the company's benefit, sent a wave of cold anger through me. "I'll need to properly hand over my files and brief whoever is taking over," I insisted, my professional instincts overriding my personal distress. "That won't be necessary. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings, and your access to all company systems has already been revoked." As if on cue, the door opened and Meridian's head of security, a man named Denton who I had always had a friendly relationship with, entered the office. His uncomfortable expression told me he found the situation as distasteful as I did. "Mr. Reed, Vanessa Meridian is asking to speak with you urgently," Denton said, pointedly not looking in my direction. "Tell her I'm in a meeting," Reed replied irritably. "She's quite insistent, sir. She says it's about the Westbrook contract." Reed's expression tightened. The Westbrook contract was our largest account, one that I had personally helped secure through careful financial structuring that benefited both parties. "Fine," he snapped. "Escort Mr. Donovan out first, then tell her I'll be available in 10 minutes. Denton finally met my eyes, apology written across his features. "This way, Michael." As we walked through the executive floor toward my office, Denton spoke quietly. "This isn't right, Michael. Everyone knows it." "What's happening here, Frank?" I asked equally quietly. "Where's Harold in all this?" "Harold's been in poor health. He's essentially retired from day-to-day operations." Reed convinced the board that Meridian needed a more aggressive growth strategy and positioned himself as the person to deliver it. And Vanessa, outmaneuvered, at least temporarily. Reed brought in 3 new board members from his network before making his move. We reached my office, where I found 2 cardboard boxes already waiting. My computer was shut down, and several drawers in my filing cabinet stood open, their contents obviously rifled through. "They've already been through my things?" I asked, incredulous. Denton looked even more uncomfortable. Reed's consultant and the IT director were in here last night. I'm sorry, Michael. This whole situation stinks. I packed quickly, taking only personal items, family photos, a few books, the fountain pen Harold had given me on my 10-year anniversary with the company. As I worked, my mind raced, considering the implications of what was happening and what I should do next. Frank, I said as I finished, tell Vanessa I'd be happy to talk if she wants to reach out. My personal cell is still the same. He nodded, taking one of the boxes while I carried the other. I'll let her know. At the lobby security desk, I surrendered my company ID and parking pass. The receptionist, Marta, who had been with Meridian almost as long as I had, looked close to tears. This isn't right, Mr. Donovan, she whispered. Everyone's talking about it. Thanks, Marta. I replied gently. Take care of yourself. The drive home was a blur. My wife, Karen, wasn't expecting me. She was at the hospital where she worked as a pediatric surgeon. Our 2 teenagers were at school. The empty house seemed to amplify the sudden silence in my professional life. I placed the boxes in my home office and sat heavily in my chair, finally opening the severance envelope. The terms were as Reed had stated: 3 months' salary and benefits, a non-disparagement clause, and a request to sign a document acknowledging my termination was not due to performance issues. My phone rang, startling me, an unknown number. Michael Donovan speaking. I answered professionally, force of habit. Michael, it's Vanessa Meridian. Her voice was tight with controlled anger. I just heard what happened. Can we meet? Of course, I replied, surprised but relieved to hear from her. When and where? There's a coffee shop called Redwood on 4th Street. Can you be there in an hour? I'll be there. Exactly 60 minutes later, I found myself sitting across from Vanessa Meridian in a quiet corner of the independent coffee shop. At 42, Vanessa had inherited her father's sharp business acumen and her mother's grace under pressure. Today, however, the strain was evident in the tightness around her eyes. First, I want to apologize, she began after we'd exchanged brief greetings. What happened to you today was unconscionable, and it happened without my knowledge or consent. I appreciate that, I replied. But I get the sense there's more going on than my termination. Vanessa nodded grimly. Gregory is systematically removing everyone loyal to my father and replacing them with his own people. 4 department heads have been restructured in the past month. You're the highest-ranking executive to go so far. Why? The company is profitable, well-managed. Because Gregory doesn't want to run my father's company, she interrupted. He wants to strip it, sell off the valuable parts, and absorb the cash into his own ventures. I sat back stunned. That would destroy everything your father built. Exactly. And my father is too ill to see what's happening. Gregory has isolated him, controls who visits, what information he receives. What about the board? 3 of the 7 members are Gregory's former colleagues. 2 others are easily manipulated. Only my father's oldest friend, Arthur Jenkins, and I stand opposed, but we're outvoted. And Elaine, your sister? Vanessa's expression clouded. Elaine believes everything Gregory tells her. She thinks he's saving the company from outdated management practices. So what's your next move? I asked. That's partly why I wanted to meet with you, Vanessa said, leaning forward. I need your help, Michael. Gregory may have control of the board, but there's something he doesn't know. Which is, my father structured the company's articles of incorporation with a special provision. If the company attempts to sell more than 25% of its assets within a 5-year period, it triggers a supermajority voting requirement. 75% of shareholders must approve. I nodded, remembering the provision. I had helped Harold implement it years ago as protection against hostile takeovers. The Meridian Family Trust holds 65% of the shares. Vanessa continued. Most people, including Gregory, assume my father controls all those shares as trustee. But that's not the case. The trust is divided, I realized, recalling the complex structure we had created. Harold, you and Elaine each control a portion. Exactly. My father controls 25%, I control 25%, and Elaine controls 15%. The remaining 35% is divided among long-term employees and a few outside investors. So even if Gregory convinces Elaine and the outside investors to support asset sales, he still needs your approval or your father's to reach the 75% threshold. I concluded. Yes, But here's where things get complicated. My father's health is deteriorating. If he becomes incapacitated, his voting rights pass to a designated proxy, who used to be my mother until she passed away last year. My father never updated the proxy designation. So in case of his incapacity, his 25% effectively becomes deadlocked, I realized. No one can vote those shares, which still prevents Gregory from reaching 75%. But it's a precarious situation, Vanessa confirmed. What I need is documented evidence of Gregory's intentions. If I can prove to the board that he's planning to dismantle the company rather than grow it, I might be able to persuade some of them to reconsider their support. And you think I can help find this evidence? I know you keep meticulous records, Michael. In the months since Gregory arrived, have you seen anything suspicious? Unusual requests for financial information, meetings with potential buyers for divisions of the company? I thought carefully, mentally reviewing the past 3 months. He did request comprehensive valuation reports for each business unit, ostensibly for strategic planning. And there were several conference calls he conducted from his office with parties he never identified. That's helpful, but not definitive, Vanessa said, disappointment evident in her voice. However, I continued, 2 weeks ago, he asked me to prepare a detailed analysis of the tax implications of selling our R&D division and manufacturing facilities while retaining the intellectual property and outsourcing production. I have copies of that analysis on my personal drive because I was working on it at home. Vanessa's eyes widened. That's exactly what I need. It shows he's exploring structural changes that would fundamentally alter the company's operations without disclosing those plans to the board. I'll send you the files this afternoon, I promised. But Vanessa, you should know, Reed mentioned bringing in a financial consultant from his previous firm. They've already begun transitioning my responsibilities. Jonathan Fielding, Vanessa supplied. Former colleague of Gregory's from Avalon Partners, the same private equity firm that was recently investigated for asset stripping 3 manufacturing companies in the Midwest. That's concerning. It gets worse. I've learned that Fielding has been reviewing our customer contracts, particularly the Westbrook account. I believe Gregory intends to renegotiate our major contracts to improve short-term profitability at the expense of long-term relationships. The Westbrook contract, that explained Reed's reaction when Denton mentioned it earlier. The Westbrook terms are carefully balanced, I said. Any attempt to squeeze more profit from them would damage a relationship we've spent years building. Exactly. And Westbrook accounts for nearly 30% of our revenue. We spent the next hour formulating a strategy. By the time we'd parted, I had agreed to compile all the potentially relevant information from my records and to reach out discreetly to certain long-term employees who held smaller equity stakes in the company. 3 days later, I received an unexpected visitor at my home. I was in my office, organizing the financial documentation Vanessa had requested, when the doorbell rang. Opening the front door, I found Harold Meridian himself standing on my porch, supported by a cane and accompanied by a home health aide who waited respectfully a few steps behind. Harold, I said, genuinely shocked to see him. Please come in. Thank you, Michael, he replied, his voice weaker than I remembered, but his eyes still sharp. I apologize for arriving unannounced, but certain conversations shouldn't happen over the phone. I helped him to the living room sofa, offered refreshments which he declined, and sat across from him, waiting. I understand my son-in-law terminated your employment, Harold began directly, without consulting me or providing a reasonable explanation. That's correct, I confirmed, seeing no benefit in sugarcoating the situation. Vanessa has been to see me, he continued. She shared her concerns about Gregory's intentions for Meridian. At first, I didn't want to believe it. Gregory has been so attentive, so insistent that his only concern is modernizing the company for growth. Harold paused, looking down at his hands, once strong and capable, now thin and slightly trembling. But I've built businesses for 40 years, Michael. I know the difference between growth strategies and extraction strategies. What Gregory describes as unlocking value sounds remarkably like dismantling everything I've built. I've compiled some information that supports those concerns, I said, gesturing toward my office. Financial analysis that Gregory requested specifically examining how to separate and sell company assets. Vanessa mentioned that. I'd like to see those documents, Harold said firmly. But first, I need to ask you something important. If we manage to remove Gregory from his position, would you be willing to return to Meridian? Not just as CFO, but in an expanded role working directly with Vanessa to stabilize the company. The question caught me by surprise. Despite the abrupt and humiliating way I'd been terminated, I had never stopped caring about Meridian Manufacturing, its employees, and its legacy. I would, I answered honestly. I've always believed in what Meridian stands for: quality, integrity, and genuine partnership with both employees and customers. That's worth fighting for. Harold nodded, satisfaction visible in his expression. Good. Now let's review those documents. We have a shareholders meeting to prepare for. The next week was a flurry of discrete activity. Harold, despite his diminished physical strength, demonstrated that his strategic mind remained formidable. He authorized me to contact Arthur Jenkins and other potential allies on the board. Vanessa worked with the company's original legal counsel, who had been sidelined but not yet replaced by Gregory, to prepare the necessary resolutions for the shareholders' meeting. Most delicate was the situation with Elaine. After much discussion, Harold decided to speak with his younger daughter personally, without Gregory present. The conversation apparently lasted hours and involved painful truths about Gregory's business history that Harold's private investigator had uncovered, information that had been deliberately kept from Elaine. By the time the emergency shareholders meeting convened, we had secured commitments from enough stakeholders to constitute more than 80% of the voting shares, including, crucially, Elaine's 15%, which she had agreed to vote according to her father's recommendation after learning the full extent of her husband's plans. I wasn't present for the actual meeting, but Vanessa called me immediately afterward. "It's done," she said, her voice showing relief and exhaustion in equal measure. "Gregory has been removed as CEO by unanimous board vote. Arthur Jenkins will serve as interim CEO until a permanent replacement is appointed." "How did Gregory take it?" I asked. "Not well," Vanessa replied, a hint of grim satisfaction in her tone. "He threatened lawsuits, claimed breach of contract, the usual. But once our legal counsel presented evidence that he had been exploring sale options without board approval and in violation of his fiduciary duty, he became much quieter. A separation agreement is being drafted now, generous enough to avoid litigation, but with ironclad provisions preventing him from any future involvement with Meridian or its clients. And Elaine," Vanessa sighed, "that's the most painful part. She's filed for separation and moved back to our father's house temporarily. She feels deeply betrayed, by Gregory, of course, but also somewhat by us for not helping her see his true character sooner." "I'm sorry," I said sincerely. "Family businesses always intertwine the professional and the personal. That's both their strength and their vulnerability." "Yes," Vanessa agreed. "But speaking of family business, my father and the board would like to meet with you tomorrow morning at 10. Can you make it?" Of course. The following morning, I arrived at Meridian Manufacturing 15 minutes early, feeling a strange mixture of apprehension and hope. Marta greeted me at the reception desk with a warm smile and a visitor badge, a somewhat ironic formality given my 12 years with the company. "Everyone's so happy you're here, Mr. Donovan," she said quietly. "Things haven't been right since you left." "Thank you, Marta. It's good to see you too." Frank Denton appeared to escort me to the boardroom, shaking my hand firmly. "Welcome back, Michael, or at least, hopefully welcome back." The boardroom contained the full board of directors, including Harold, who sat at the head of the table, looking more energized than he had at my home the previous week. Vanessa sat to his right, with Arthur Jenkins to his left. The remaining board members, including those who had previously supported Gregory, showed varying degrees of discomfort and respect as I entered. "Michael," Harold began once I was seated, "thank you for coming. The events of the past week have made it clear that Meridian needs to return to the principles and leadership style that built its success. The board has unanimously approved a restructuring of our executive team." He gestured to Vanessa, who continued seamlessly. "We would like to offer you the position of Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer, reporting directly to me as the new Chief Executive Officer. This represents an expansion of your previous responsibilities to include strategic planning and operational oversight in partnership with the CEO. Arthur Jenkins, a man of few words, added, "Your loyalty to this company, even after being unjustly removed from it, speaks volumes about your character, Michael." The board is unanimous in its desire to have you return in this enhanced capacity. I looked around the table, noting the nodding heads of even those board members who had supported Gregory's ascension. Perhaps they were simply aligning themselves with a new power structure, but their approval seemed genuine. I'm honored by your confidence, I replied. Before I accept, however, I'd like to understand the board's vision for Meridian's future. The past few months have revealed vulnerabilities in our governance and succession planning that should be addressed to prevent similar situations from arising again. Harold smiled, the familiar expression of approval I'd seen whenever I asked necessary but difficult questions during my tenure. An excellent point, he acknowledged. Vanessa, would you outline the governance changes we discussed? For the next half hour, Vanessa detailed a comprehensive plan to strengthen Meridian's corporate governance, including expanding the board with independent directors, implementing more robust succession planning, and creating additional checks and balances on executive authority. Additionally, she concluded, we're establishing a stock ownership program that will increase employee equity participation over the next 5 years. We believe that broader ownership will strengthen commitment to the company's long-term success and make it more difficult for any individual to gain disproportionate influence. The plan addressed virtually all the concerns I would have raised. It balanced family control with professional management, created appropriate oversight mechanisms, and aligned everyone's interests with the company's sustainable growth. In that case, I said I would be proud to accept the position and help implement this vision. The relief and approval around the table was palpable. As the meeting concluded and board members offered their congratulations, Harold asked me to stay behind. Once we were alone with Vanessa, he spoke with the directness that had always characterized his leadership. When I brought Gregory into this company, I made a serious error in judgment, he admitted. I allowed personal considerations, my desire to see both my daughters happily settled in the family business, to override the careful evaluation I would have applied to any other executive candidate. Dad, you couldn't have known, Vanessa began. I could have and should have. Harold interrupted gently. The signs were there. His history of short-term positions, the vagueness about his accomplishments, his rapid shift from courting Elaine to courting me for a position in the company. I chose not to see them because I wanted to believe the best of the man my daughter had married. He turned to me. Michael, one of the most valuable traits in a business leader is the ability to acknowledge mistakes and learn from them. I've made a significant one, and the company nearly paid the price. I'm grateful that you and Vanessa had the courage and foresight to prevent that outcome. We all want what's best for Meridian, I replied simply. Indeed, and now, with the right leadership team in place, I can focus on my health with greater peace of mind. The transition back into Meridian was remarkably smooth. My former team welcomed me enthusiastically, and even those executives who had been brought in during Gregory's brief tenure seemed relieved by the return to more transparent and collaborative leadership. Within 6 months, the company had not only stabilized but begun implementing the strategic growth initiatives that Vanessa and I had developed together. Our emphasis on innovation, quality, and strong customer relationships proved to be exactly what the market was seeking in an increasingly commoditized industry. As for Gregory Reed, he left the city shortly after his removal, reportedly taking a position with a private equity firm on the West Coast. Elaine eventually filed for divorce and, after some time away, returned to Meridian in a role managing our newly established charitable foundation. Perhaps the most significant change came a year after the shareholders' meeting that had altered Meridian's trajectory. Harold, whose health had improved with reduced stress and proper treatment, called Vanessa and me to his home one evening. I've been thinking about the future, he said as we sat in his study. Not just Meridian's future, but my own. He handed each of us a document, the updated trust agreement governing the Meridian family shares. I've restructured the trust, he explained. Upon my eventual passing, my 25% ownership will be divided. 10% will go to the employee ownership fund. 5% will be held in trust for Elaine. The remaining 10% will be divided equally between you, Vanessa, and you, Michael. I looked up stunned. Harold, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, he replied with a smile. You've demonstrated something I've always believed but rarely found, that family businesses need both family and non-family leaders who care deeply about their legacy. You've earned your place in Meridian's future, not through marriage or birth, but through dedication and principle. Vanessa reached over and squeezed my hand. I couldn't agree more, Dad. Michael has been part of the Meridian family in every way that matters. 3 years have passed since that conversation. Harold still serves as chairman of the board, though his day-to-day involvement has naturally decreased with age. Vanessa has proven to be an exceptional CEO, balancing innovation with the core values that made Meridian successful. And in my role as executive vice president, I found fulfillment in helping to guide the company's financial strategy while mentoring the next generation of leaders. The crisis precipitated by Gregory Reed's brief tenure taught us all valuable lessons about governance, succession, and the delicate balance between family and business interests. But perhaps the most important lesson was more personal. Sometimes losing your position can ultimately lead to finding your place. As Harold often says now when recounting the story to new employees, the true measure of a company isn't whether it avoids mistakes, but how it responds to them. And the true measure of leadership isn't authority, but accountability. Words to build a business by, and to live by as well.